Snow fell hard over Detroit that night, slow and silent, settling on the shoulders of a man who had forgotten how to breathe. Andre Coleman stood frozen in the alley behind the Wexford Hotel, staring at a leather bag half buried in the slush beside the back tire of a Bentley. $50,000 cash, stacked in neat bands beneath the amber glow of the loading dock light. He had $40 to his name, an eviction notice taped to his door, a 7-year-old daughter wheezing through another asthma attack in a room without heat. No cameras, no witnesses, no one would ever know. 2 minutes later, he walked back into the lobby and laid every bill on the front desk. From a second-floor window, billionaire Vivian Crane watched him do it and refused to believe what her own eyes had shown her. That night, she followed him home. The hallway light in apartment 306 flickered twice before holding. Andre Coleman had stopped reporting it to the building manager months ago. He had stopped reporting most things. He worked the wrench under the kitchen sink in silence, listening for the wheeze. Down the hallway, Nia's small bedroom door stood half open, and the sound that came through it had the rhythm he had learned to read like a heartbeat. Shallow, steady, tolerable. The girl was 7 years old, and she had been wheezing since she was 3. He had been a firefighter once. Engine 21, west side of Detroit, 7. Good years before a steel beam in the Brixton building came down on his right knee and ended the only life he had ever wanted. The pension paid for groceries and not much else. The rest he scraped together with extension cords and toolboxes and food deliveries that ran until the city went quiet. His wife had been gone for 3 winters now, a driver who didn't see the red light. A folded American flag the firehouse had handed him at the funeral because Renee had loved them all like brothers. He kept the flag in the top drawer of the dresser beneath the socks. Beside it, in a small frame turned face down, was a photograph of the 4 men in his old engine company and Andre standing at the end of the row, the tallest of them, his dark hands folded in front of him, the only one not smiling because Renee had told him to look serious and he never could tell when she was joking. He hadn't opened that drawer in 2 years. What he opened instead was bills. That morning, the bills lay across the kitchen table in 3 uneven stacks. Hospital, utilities, rent. The hospital stack was the tallest. The rent stack had a single sheet on top printed on heavy paper. The words, "Final notice to quit" in bold capital letters across the header. 7 days. The landlord had been generous, all things considered. Nia came into the kitchen barefoot, dragging her blanket behind her like a tail. She climbed onto the chair across from him and reached for a piece of paper near the bottom of the hospital stack, an older one yellowed at the corners. "Dad." She held it up. He reached over without thinking and smoothed down the cloud of curls at the back of her head, where they had flattened in the night the way Renee used to, the way he had taught his own clumsy hands to do in the years since. The logo at the top was navy blue, a small geometric shape that looked like a compass. This is the one that didn't pay right. Andre glanced at it. The word cardinal ran along the top in confident type. Below it, stamped diagonally in red, claim denied. That's the one he said. Why didn't they pay? Because grown-ups sometimes decide that the rules they wrote get to mean whatever they want them to mean. Nia thought about that. Then she put the paper carefully back where she had found it. "Being poor isn't a reason to be small," she said, in the voice of someone reciting a thing she had heard many times. He smiled at her. "That's right. Or mean. That too." She wheezed once softly and reached for her inhaler on the counter. The plastic was scratched along the side from being dropped again and again by small hands. He watched her use it. He counted the seconds between each breath until the count steadied. Across town, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that caught the morning light like a blade, Vivian Crane stood at her office window and watched the snow begin. She was 38 years old and had not been surprised by another human being in almost a decade. Surprise required belief, and belief in her experience was a luxury that always cost more than it returned. Her ex-husband had taught her that with a forged signature on a joint account. Her co-founder had taught her again 2 years later when he walked out of the building with the source code for a product she had spent 4 years designing. She had rebuilt the company from her apartment in 7 months and bought him out of the industry inside of 3 more. The trade press had called it ruthless. She had called it tuition. Now, she ran an empire. Crane Holdings owned 11 companies in 4 sectors, the largest of which was Cardinal Insurance, a subsidiary so quietly profitable that she rarely had to look at it. It is worth pausing here on the strange arithmetic of a woman like this. We tend to imagine that the people who hurt us most do it on purpose, that there is a hand on a lever somewhere and a face behind it. But the truth is quieter and colder than that. The greatest harm in this story was never done by a villain. It was done by a signature on page 43, applied by a woman who was simply too far away to see the names. Distance, not malice, is what lets ordinary people sign off on ruin. And if that is true of her, it is worth asking how far we each sit from the consequences of our own small approvals. That night, her foundation was hosting its annual auction at the Wexford Hotel. 400 guests, black tie, the kind of evening where strangers wrote checks with extra zeros to feel briefly clean. She had stopped attending these events for the company. She attended now only for the donations. Her assistant, a young man named Daniel Pierce, set a tablet on her desk and slid it toward her without comment. He had worked for her for 2 years and had learned the particular grammar of her silences. The tablet showed the guest list. She did not read it. "There's a private contribution coming in tonight," he said. "Anonymous. Mr. Whitaker wants to hand it to you directly before the speeches. 50,000. Cash. Cash. He prefers it. Old-fashioned." A small sound left her that was not quite a laugh. "Tell him I'll meet him by the rear lobby at 8 o'clock. I don't want it in the room while the auction's running." Daniel nodded and left. She stood at the window a while longer, watching the snow thicken over Woodward Avenue. Somewhere in the streets below, a man she had never heard of was running his last delivery of the night. The Wexford's loading dock smelled like wet cardboard and exhaust. Andre parked the van where the night porter waved him in, signed the clipboard, handed over the catering crates, and turned back toward the alley with his hands jammed deep into the pockets of his jacket. The snow had begun coming down harder. He could feel it through the soles of his boots where the rubber had worn thin enough to read a newspaper through. The Bentley was idling near the rear exit exhaust, curling white in the cold. A man in a long camel coat was loading something into the trunk, talking on his phone, gesturing with his free hand. Andre walked past him without looking. He didn't make a habit of looking at men in coats that cost more than his rent. He had learned a long time ago that a black man in a worn jacket standing too long near a car like that became a story someone else got to tell, so he kept his eyes forward and his pace even the way he always did. He was almost to the van when he saw the back. It lay in the slush against the Bentley's back tire, half tucked into the curve of the wheel well, like it had been set down for a moment and forgotten. Black leather. Heavy. The man in the coat was already in the driver's seat, the door closing, the tail lights flaring red as the car pulled forward and out of the alley. Andre stood still for a count of 3, then he bent down and picked it up. He didn't unzip it in the alley. He carried it back to the van, set it on the passenger seat, closed the door, and only then did he reach for the zipper. The smell came up first. New paper. Ink. That dry, particular smell that money has when there is enough of it in one place. $50,000. He didn't have to count it. The bands told him, 10 stacks of 5. For a long moment, he did not move. The wipers ticked back and forth across the windshield. The snow piled itself patiently along the bottom of the glass. He thought about the hospital stack on the kitchen table. He thought about the 7-day notice. He thought about Nia's inhaler and the broken nebulizer in the bathroom cabinet that the pharmacy had quoted at $600 to replace. He thought about a year of nights without the math. He thought about Nia wearing a coat that fit her, eating fruit that wasn't bruised, sleeping in a room that was warm. Then he thought about who he was. He had told her every morning for 4 years that being poor wasn't a reason to be small. He had told her in the hospital waiting room. He had told her in the line at the food pantry. He had told her the night the heater died and they slept under 3 coats in the same bed. He could not look at her in the morning and know that the man who had said those things was no longer the man saying them. He zipped the bag shut. He got out of the van. He walked back into the Wexford through the side door, past the kitchens, past the noise of the auction in the ballroom, into the marble lobby where the chandelier hung like a slow rain of glass. He set the bag on the front desk and slid it across to the clerk. "This was dropped in the alley by the rear lot," he said. "About 10 minutes ago. There's $50,000 in it. You'll want to call security and lock it in your safe." The clerk stared at him. "Sir, your name doesn't matter." He was already turning. "Just get it back to whoever lost it." He walked out into the snow. 2 floors above him, behind a wall of curved glass that overlooked the rear entrance, Vivian Crane held a half-empty champagne flute in one hand and her phone in the other. And she watched the man in the worn canvas jacket walk back out into the cold, without so much as a glance over his shoulder. She had seen him pick up the bag. She had seen him stand beside the van for almost 2 full minutes. She had seen him walk it back inside. She watched him until he disappeared around the corner, and then she set the flute down on the table behind her so carefully that the bubbles did not stir. Daniel. He was at her elbow within seconds, the man who just walked out of the rear lobby canvas jacket. "I want a name. I want it tonight." Daniel did not ask why. He was a good assistant. He never asked why. 3 hours later, Andre pulled the van into the lot behind his building and didn't notice the dark sedan that turned in 2 blocks behind him and idled by the curb across the street with its lights off. Vivian sat in the back seat with her coat still on and watched the 3rd-floor window of apartment 306 come slowly to life. The curtain was thin. The room was narrow. She could see most of it from where she sat. She watched him hang his jacket on the back of a chair. She watched him crouch beside a small bed in the next room and pull the blanket up to a thin pair of shoulders. She watched him stand in the kitchen and eat half of a sandwich and wrap the other half in foil and put it in the refrigerator. She watched him sit down at the kitchen table with the bills and lower his face into his hands for a long time without making any sound at all. Then she watched him get up, take a screwdriver out of a drawer, kneel beside an old radiator under the window and begin very carefully to take it apart. It was 12 degrees outside. The driver up front cleared his throat once gently around 100 in the morning. Vivian did not respond. She was still watching the window. The man in apartment 306 fixed the radiator at 1:47 in the morning. She knew because she watched the heat come up a small ripple in the curtain when the air finally moved through the room. He stood and stretched his back and went to check on the girl in the bedroom one more time before he turned off the kitchen light. Vivian told the driver to take her home. She did not sleep. Daniel Pierce came into her office at 7 o'clock the next morning with a folder under his arm and the careful expression of a man who had spent the night reading something he did not enjoy. "Andre Coleman," he said. 34, widowed, 1 daughter, 7 chronic asthma lives on disability, and freelance handyman work 2 months behind on rent. He set the folder on her desk. He used to be a firefighter. Used to be. Engine 21. He left the service in 2019. Knee injury. Something in her chest went still. "Where was the injury?" Daniel looked at her. "The Brixton fire." For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the soft hum of the air handling system. The name landed in her like a stone dropped into deep water. She could feel the rings move outward slowly, touching things she had not thought about in years. The Brixton fire. 2019. 6 people dead. 11 survivors, a faulty alarm system, a furious neighborhood, a bankrupt building owner, and a quiet wave of denied claims that her insurance subsidiary had pushed through that summer because the policy fine print allowed it. She had signed off on the quarterly report. She had not read the names. She had glanced past the name Coleman once. She was sure of it now. She remembered the shape of it on a page. "Pull the original file," she said. "All of it. Every report. Every claim. Every interview. I want it on my desk by tonight." "Yes, ma'am." Daniel hesitated at the door. "There's one more thing." His voice was careful. "There's a story circulating in the industry has been for years that Coleman was the cause of the fire. Negligence. That's part of why we denied the claim so cleanly. The narrative was already there. She looked up at him slowly. And was he... Daniel held her gaze. I don't know. The story never matched what was in the original report. I checked this morning. He closed the door behind him. Vivian sat alone in her office and looked down at the folder. Outside the window, the city was waking up under a clean white skin of new snow, indifferent and beautiful. And somewhere in it, a man she had never met was making breakfast for a daughter who could not breathe in the cold. She had spent 20 years building an empire on the principle that no one could be trusted past their own self-interest. And the night before, from the back seat of a car on a frozen street on the east side, she had watched a man with $40 to his name fix his own radiator at 100 in the morning because his daughter was sleeping in the next room. She did not know yet whether to believe her eyes or her files. She knew only that one of them was lying. There is something worth sitting with at the close of all this. We spend so much of our lives deciding who is worth trusting, and we almost always look in the wrong direction. We trust the confident voice, the clean signature, the man in the expensive coat. We are suspicious of the worn jacket and the late delivery. But character does not announce itself in a lobby full of cameras. It shows up at 1 in the morning in a cold room with no one watching when a person does the unglamorous right thing simply because it is theirs to do. If you ever want to know who someone really is, do not ask what they say when the room is full. Watch what they fix when the room is empty. The Brixton file came up the elevator in a banker's box at 6 o'clock that evening, and Vivian did not open it right away. She let it sit on the corner of her desk while she finished a call with London while she signed off on a press release about the Foundation's quarterly disbursements while she stood at the window and watched the street lamps flicker on along Woodward Avenue. She was not avoiding it. She was preparing for it. There was a difference, she told herself, between the two. When the office had gone quiet and the cleaning crew had moved past her door, she sat down and lifted the lid. She did not read the report first. She read his statement. It ran to 7 pages, single-spaced, written in a firefighter's flat, deliberate handwriting. He described entering the Brixton building at 11:42 on the night of March 14, 2019. He described the smoke on the 3rd floor. He described carrying a woman in a blue nightgown down 2 flights of stairs and going back in. He described pulling a boy of perhaps 9 out of a closet on the 4th floor and going back in. He described the 2nd floor hallway where the heat had collapsed the drop ceiling and a woman trapped beneath it whose name he had not asked. He described the beam coming down on his right knee as he tried to lift her clear. She read the line twice. I knew the leg was finished before I was out of the building. I got her into the truck. After that, I don't remember things in order. 11 survivors. 3 children. He had been the first one through the door and the last one out. She read the original fire marshal's findings next. The cause of the blaze was a faulty smoke and alarm system on floors 2 through 6, a system the building's owner had been cited twice in the previous year for failing to maintain. The wiring had been patched, not replaced. A short in the electrical closet on the 2nd floor had been smoldering for hours before anyone knew. There was no mention anywhere of negligence on the part of the responding fire crew. There was no mention of Andre Coleman as anything other than a man who had gone in 4 times. She moved to the Cardinal file last. It was thinner than she had expected. A 2-page memo from a claims supervisor whose name she did not recognize recommending denial on the basis of owner non-compliance with maintenance schedule, voiding coverage under Section 7. A signature page. Her own initials in the lower right corner of the quarterly approvals, small, neat, unmistakable beside 43 other claim numbers. She had not paused over either. The decision had taken a building owner into bankruptcy, scattered 78 tenants who had lost their homes, and pushed a wave of unpaid medical and funeral expenses out into the street with nowhere to land. In a city that needed someone to blame, the story had landed on the only person still standing in the wreckage. The firefighter with the bad knee who couldn't speak for himself because he was busy learning to walk again. She had signed the page. She had not read the names. She did not cry. She had not cried in 7 years and was not going to begin now over paperwork. But she sat in the dim office for a long time, with her hand resting on the open folder, and she understood with a clarity that felt almost surgical that her empire and his ruin were the same building. There is a particular kind of injustice that costs nothing to commit and everything to undo. It is worth noticing how easily the story attached itself to Andre, and not to the building owner, not to the patched wiring, not to the company that denied the claims. A city needed someone to carry the blame, and it chose the man who could least afford to set it down. The injured one, the quiet one, the one already on the ground. We are quick, all of us, to hand our discomfort to whoever is least able to refuse it. The measure of a fair person is not whether they ever pick up a false story, but whether they have the courage to put it down once they learn the truth. She closed the file. She picked up her phone. "Daniel, I need a house." There was a small silence on the other end. "What kind of house, ma'am?" "Something small suburban, needs work. Buy it through one of the holding companies. Not my name, not Crane. Have the deed in the name of a woman named Sarah Crane. Make her recently divorced. Make her quiet. Ma'am, tonight, Daniel. By tomorrow morning, I want the keys." She hung up before he could ask the question she did not want to answer. The house in Royal Oak was the color of weak tea, with a porch that sloped 2 degrees off level and a back door that wouldn't close all the way without a shoulder against it. By Friday afternoon, she had a key in her purse, a story she had practiced twice in the mirror, and the phone number of a handyman she had found in a local listings flyer that Daniel had arranged to leave on her windshield. She called from the kitchen of the empty house, standing at the counter, listening to the wind move through a loose pane upstairs. "Coleman Repair." The voice was even and lower than she remembered. "My name is Sarah Crane." She turned slightly toward the window as though he could see her face through the line. "I just bought a place on Marlowe Street. The previous owners left it in worse shape than the listing suggested. I was told you do general work." "I do. Could you come by tomorrow?" He was quiet for a moment. She could hear somewhere behind his voice the sound of a small girl asking a question. "I can come at 10 o'clock, he said. "I charge $35 an hour. I'll give you an estimate before I start anything." 10 is fine. She gave him the address. She hung up. She set the phone on the counter and looked at it as though it had bitten her. He arrived at 9:57. She had been watching from the front window for almost an hour. In daylight, he looked smaller than he had through the kitchen curtain on the east side. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and a few days of beard he hadn't found time to take off. The canvas jacket was the same. The boots were the same. His hair was newly cut, which surprised her. She had imagined a man who did not care about such things, and when he shook her hand at the door, his grip was firm but careful, the way a man holds something that might be more fragile than it looks. "Mrs. Crane. Sarah, please." "Sarah?" He stepped past her into the front hall, looking up at the ceiling, the corners, the angle of the floor under his feet. He was already working. Whoever did the last paint job here covered up some water damage in the upstairs corner. "I'd want to look at that first, whatever you think." He glanced at her, then briefly, with the slightly puzzled expression of a man who was used to clients with more opinions, and went up the stairs. She had thought it would feel like espionage. It did not. It felt instead like sitting across from a stranger who was the only person in a long time who looked at her without calculating what she could do for him. He gave her his estimate after an hour, written on a small notepad in a hand she now recognized. He charged less than he should have. When she asked him why, he said, "Because that's what the work costs." In a voice that did not invite negotiation. He did not flirt. He did not ask about her divorce. He did not look at her clothes or her car or the obvious newness of every appliance in the kitchen. He looked at the walls. He looked at the wiring in the basement. He looked at the pilot light on the water heater and frowned and said it would need replacing before winter took a serious turn. On his third visit, she set her wallet down on the kitchen counter while she went to take a phone call, and when she came back, the wallet was where she had left it. And Andre was on the back porch, checking a railing. She walked over with the wallet in her hand. There was $3,000 in here. He looked at her without confusion. "I saw. You didn't count it. It's not mine to count, ma'am." He went back to the railing. She stood in the doorway with the wallet in her hand and felt something inside her chest do a thing she had no language for. The first time Naya came was on a Saturday. He had warned her on the phone the night before. I don't usually bring her on jobs, but her sitter canceled, and I can't say no to a half-day's work right now. She'll stay in the truck with a book. She won't be in your way. Bring her in, Vivian had said before she had decided to say it. It's too cold to sit in a truck. Nia came up the front walk holding her father's hand and a thick paperback with a unicorn on the cover. She wore a pink hat that was a size too big and pulled down nearly to her eyes, two careful braids escaping from under the brim where her father's patient hands had set them that morning. She studied Vivian carefully from under the brim. "Hi," Vivian said. "Hi," said Nia. "You have eyes like my mom in the photo. Sad but pretty." Andre made a small sound behind her. Half apology, half something else. Vivian did not turn around. She looked down at the small girl in the too large hat and felt the floor of the room shift 1 degree under her. "Thank you," she said carefully. "What are you reading?" Nia held up the book. "It's about a girl who finds a unicorn. The unicorn is hurt. She has to fix him. Does she?" "She does," Nia said with the gravity of a child who had thought about the ending. "But she has to give up something she loves to do it." That sounds like a hard book. It's a good book. By lunchtime, Nia was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with a sketch pad open across her knees, drawing in long, careful strokes. When Vivian came in with a sandwich and set it down beside her, Nia tore the page off without ceremony and handed it up. It was a portrait. Not a child's stick figure portrait. A real one in the way only certain children draw where the proportions were wrong, but the person was right. Vivian's face, the line of her jaw, the dark hair pulled back, the slight tilt of the head she did not know she did. Across the bottom, Nia had written in careful block letters, "Dad's new friend." She did not show the drawing to Andre. She folded it once and put it inside the pocket of her coat, and she did not take it out again for many days. The first sign of trouble came 8 days later. A man named Earl Donovan, who had hired Andre to redo the wiring in a basement apartment on the west side, called and canceled in a voice that did not quite meet his words. 2 days after that, a contractor on Mack Avenue who had used Andre 3 times told him gently that things were getting quieter on his end and he wouldn't be needing the help. By the end of the second week, the only steady work Andre had left was the house in Royal Oak. He didn't say anything to Vivian about it. She heard him on the phone in the backyard one afternoon, his voice low and careful, asking someone, "What story exactly are people telling?" The person on the other end said something. Andre said, "That was 5 years ago, and that's not what happened." "And no, I understand." Then he hung up and stood with his hand over his mouth for almost a full minute before he came back inside and went back to work as though nothing had happened. That night in a parking garage 2 blocks from the Crane Holdings Tower, Daniel Pierce sat in his own car with his phone pressed to his ear and spoke quietly to a man whose name he had been careful never to say out loud. "She's wobbling," he said. "I'll handle it." Then he hung up and drove home and slept very well. The story of the Brixton fire moved through the local trades in the way old stories move, half-remembered, sharpened by the retelling given new edges by people who had not been there. A handyman in Corktown heard it from his cousin, who heard it from a man at a bar. A contractor in Hamtramck heard it from a foreman who had heard it from a building manager. By the second week of February, the version in circulation said that Andre Coleman had been drunk that night or asleep at the firehouse or responsible somehow for the wiring he had not touched. The version did not have to be consistent. It only had to be loud. His landlord called and shortened the eviction window to 3 days. He did not tell Nia. Nia found out anyway the way children do, which was that on a Tuesday afternoon, she was watching the small television Vivian kept in the kitchen at Marlowe Street while her father regrouted the bathroom tile upstairs, and a daytime business program ran a segment on the most powerful women in American technology. The fourth woman they featured was a brunette in a dark gray jacket standing in front of a glass tower. The graphic across the bottom of the screen read Vivian Crane, CEO, Crane Holdings parent company of Cardinal Insurance and 10 other firms. Nia watched for a full 30 seconds. Then she went to the foot of the stairs and called up very calmly, "Dad, Miss Sarah's on TV." There was a small noise from upstairs. That was the sound of a man setting down a tool slowly and deliberately on a tiled floor. He came down the stairs the way a man walks to the door of a hospital room. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the segment for 9 more seconds before the anchor moved on. He looked at the empty screen for several beats longer than that. He did not look at Nia. He did not look at Vivian, who had come in from the living room behind him and was standing very still in the doorway with both hands at her sides. "Nia," he said, "get your coat." "Daddy, get your coat, baby." She went. He turned then and looked at Vivian. And the look was not the one she had expected. It was not hatred. It was not even anger. It was the careful, distant courtesy of a man being escorted out of a room he had never been welcome in. "Have you had enough fun yet, Mrs. Crane?" The room was very quiet. "Andre, don't. Let me." I said don't. His voice did not rise. It got somehow smaller and more final. "You don't come near her again. You don't come near me again. I don't know what kind of project you thought this was, and I don't want to know. We're done here." He set his keys on the counter beside the wallet she had left out 3 weeks before. He took Nia's hand at the door. He did not look back. She stood in the kitchen alone for a long time after they were gone. 48 hours later, Andre sat at his own kitchen table on the east side with a duffel bag at his feet and a Greyhound timetable on the table in front of him. Renee had a great aunt in a town outside Toledo whose porch she had visited twice as a child. The woman was old and lived alone and had said yes when he called. He had sold the van. He had sold the tools that did not fit in the duffel. The bus left at 6 o'clock in the morning. He was checking Nia's bag one more time when she came out of the bedroom and put a hand against her chest and said, "Daddy." He looked up. He had seen her like this before. He knew the shape of it before she finished the word. The wheeze was already wrong. It was not the rhythm he had learned to read. It was the rhythm that meant a hospital. He carried her down 3 flights of stairs in his arms because the elevator had not worked since November, and the lobby was empty, and the snow was coming down in the kind of slow, weighty way it had on the night he had found the bag, and her breath against his neck was a small, wet hiss that did not slow down. He ran the 4 blocks to Riverside General with her in his arms. The desk nurse took one look at the color of her lips and called for a room. The intake clerk 10 minutes later looked at him with practiced sympathy and said the words, "Deposit and 12,000, and unfortunately we can't admit to the intensive program without it. And is there a card, sir, or a family member we can call?" He stood at the counter with his hands flat against the laminate and tried very hard to make his face stay still. By the time the second nurse came out to ask him to step into the small office down the hall, the money had already cleared. It'd been paid in full by wire from an account he did not recognize under the name V. Crane. He looked at the receipt the clerk handed him. He read the name twice. Then he handed it back across the counter. "Refund it," he said. "Sir, refund it. All of it. I'll pay another way. Sir, your daughter." I said, "Refund it." He did not know yet that on the other side of the city, in an office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower, Vivian Crane was just opening the first email from a reporter at the Free Press, asking for comment on what they were describing as her month-long covert surveillance of a working-class single father. He did not know that the source quoted in the email was a senior member of Ms. Crane's executive staff. He did not know that the same article would appear in the morning edition with a photograph of Vivian's car parked on a snow-banked street on the east side. He did not know that Crane Holdings stock would open the next day at a price that would drop by almost a quarter before lunch, or that the board would be on the phone with her by 10 o'clock. He knew only that his daughter was on the other side of a swinging door, that her breath was a wet small machine, and that the only person in the world who could afford to keep her alive was the one person he could not let near her. He sat down in the plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room and put his head into his hands. For the first time in his life, he understood that pride could be a thing that killed someone you loved. Here, before we go on, it is worth being honest about something. Pride is not the enemy in this story, and neither is humility. Andre's refusal to take the money is the same instinct that made him hand back $50,000 in a hotel lobby, the same spine that kept him a whole man through 5 years of being called something he was not. That is not a flaw to be corrected. But there is a place where dignity stops protecting the people we love and starts endangering them, and the hardest growing up any of us does is learning to tell the two apart. Sometimes, the bravest thing a strong person can do is let themselves be helped. If you are someone who has always carried it alone, this is the gentle word. Accepting help is not the same as being small. It is often the larger act. Let the people who want to stand beside you do it. You do not have to earn your own child's safety twice. The waiting room at Riverside General held a particular kind of silence. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the silence of a building that had given up on being quiet and settled instead for being still. The vending machine in the corner hummed. A janitor mopped a square of floor 20 feet away and did not look up. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Andre sat with his hands folded in his lap and watched the door of the pediatric wing. He had refunded the money. He had said the words and signed the form, and watched the clerk type the reversal into the system with a face that was carefully not asking him to reconsider. He had then walked to the chair in the corner and sat down. He had taken out his wallet. He had counted the bills inside, which came to $37. He had put the wallet back in his pocket. A doctor had come out at 1:23 to tell him that Nia was stable for now on a basic protocol. The word "for now" had a particular weight. The doctor had said it twice. She had also said, with the careful neutrality of a woman who had said it many times before, that if her condition deteriorated through the night, the basic protocol would not be enough, and the intensive program was no longer an option without the deposit. He had said he understood. She had looked at him for a long moment, and then she had gone back through the door. He sat now and listened to the hum of the vending machine. And he thought about the years he had spent telling Nia that being poor was not a reason to be small. He thought about the morning he had sat across from her at the kitchen table and watched her recite it back to him in the voice of a child who believed her father. The man who had said those things had been certain. The man sitting in the plastic chair was not. Somewhere across the city, in an office where the lights had not gone off all night, Vivian Crane sat at her desk with 2 documents in front of her. The first was a letter of resignation drafted by the chairman of her board, who had called her at 11 o'clock and again at midnight and once more at 2 o'clock in the morning. The letter explained in language she had used herself many times against other people that her continued tenure at the head of Crane Holdings represented an unacceptable governance risk in light of recent press. It required only her signature. The board had agreed to a separation package that would let her keep most of what she had built. The equity, the real estate, the private accounts. She would lose the chair. She would lose the company. She would keep enough that no one she met for the rest of her life would ever call her anything but rich. The second document was the Brixton file, the full one. The original report, the denied claims, the names, the memos. The signature page where her own initials sat in the lower right corner beside 43 claim numbers she had not paused over. She had read the file 4 times in the last 40 hours. She thought about the man in the canvas jacket who had handed a leather bag across a marble counter and walked out without leaving his name. She thought about a small girl in a too large hat who had handed up a drawing of her face and called her dad's new friend. She thought about a wallet on a kitchen counter with $3,000 in it that no one had touched. She thought about the line in his statement. "I knew the leg was finished before I was out of the building." She picked up the pen. She drew it across the resignation letter once on the diagonal in a long, clean line. Then she picked up her phone and woke her communications director out of a sound sleep. "Set a press conference," she said. 9 o'clock in the morning, the lobby of the building, every outlet. No screening of questions. The man on the other end of the line, to his credit, asked only one thing. "What's the topic, ma'am?" The Brixton Fire 2019. There was a small silence. Ma'am, that's... Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Make the call. She hung up. She did not sit down again. She walked to the window and stood with her hands in her pockets and watched the dawn come up over the Detroit River. The water the color of slate, the sky the color of old pewter. And she thought with something that was very close to relief that this was the first decision she had made in 20 years that did not cost the right thing in order to keep the wrong thing. The press conference happened at 9 o'clock sharp. She stood at a small wooden lectern in the lobby of the Crane Holdings Tower with no notes and no makeup and a navy gray suit that she had owned for 9 years. She did not begin with a greeting. She did not thank anyone for coming. In March of 2019, she said, "A building called Brixton caught fire on the west side of Detroit. 6 people died. 11 survived. They survived because a firefighter named Andre Coleman went into the building 4 times against orders and carried them out one at a time. He came out the 4th time on a stretcher with a steel beam injury that ended his career. The room had been murmuring. The murmuring stopped. The fire was caused by a faulty alarm and electrical system that the building's owner had been cited for failing to maintain. The fire marshal's report at the time was clear about this. It made no allegation against the responding fire crew. It made no allegation against Andre Coleman. The cause was negligence, and the negligent party was the building owner who carried an insurance policy with Cardinal Insurance, a subsidiary of Crane Holdings. She did not look down at the lectern. She looked at the cameras. Cardinal Insurance denied every claim associated with that fire. The denials moved through this company's quarterly approval process. My signature is on the page that approved them. I did not read the names on that page. That is not a defense. It is a confession. A wave moved through the reporters. She did not slow down. In the years that followed, in a city looking for someone to hold responsible, a story began to circulate in the trades that Andre Coleman had somehow been the cause of the fire he ran into. That story was false. It was convenient. It was not corrected by Cardinal or by this company because the silence served us. A man who saved 11 lives has spent 5 years being called a coward in the rooms where he goes to look for work. He has spent 5 years losing jobs because a story we never told the truth about followed him into every kitchen and basement in this city. She set both hands flat on the lectern. Today, Crane Holdings is establishing the Renee Coleman Foundation, named for the wife of Andre Coleman. The foundation will provide medical housing and family support to firefighters injured in the line of duty in the city of Detroit and across the state of Michigan. I am committing $80 million of my personal assets as the foundation's initial endowment. Cardinal Insurance will reopen and readjudicate every claim associated with the Brixton fire. The corrected payouts will be backdated to 2019 and will include interest. She drew a breath. The room was very quiet. Effective at the conclusion of this statement, I am resigning as Chief Executive Officer of Crane Holdings. I will not be retaining a seat on the board. I will not be retaining a consulting role. I am the person whose name is on the page. The page is wrong. The page is mine. She did not take questions. She walked off the small dais, through the lobby, out the front doors, and into a black sedan that was waiting at the curb. She did not look back at the cameras. In the waiting room at Riverside General, Andre watched the same press conference on a muted television above the vending machine, and he understood somewhere around the second paragraph that the woman on the screen was not speaking to the cameras. She was speaking to him. She did not say his daughter's name. She did not mention a leather bag. She did not mention a Marlowe Street address. She did not mention an evening in February when she had stood in a kitchen and listened to a man tell her very quietly that she was no longer welcome near his child. She gave him back the only thing he had not been able to give back himself, his name. He watched the broadcast to the end. He did not move when it cut to a panel of analysts. He did not move when a woman in a hospital uniform came across the room and sat down beside him with a clipboard and a careful expression. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "there's been a change in your daughter's coverage." He looked at her. "The Renee Coleman Foundation has notified us that Nia's care is being funded under their first response program for families of injured firefighters. The intensive protocol has been reauthorized. We can move her this morning. He did not say anything for a long moment. That's the foundation. Yes, sir. Not a person. It's the foundation, Mr. Coleman. The foundation is paying. He looked down at his hands. He looked at the screen where a graphic now displayed the stock price of Crane Holdings dropping in a clean, almost graceful line. He looked at the woman with the clipboard. He understood in that moment what Vivian had done. She had not put her name on the wire transfer. She had put it on the building. She had built the building around the wire transfer so that he could accept it without owing anyone anything but the country he had once been willing to run into a burning room for. It was not charity. It was the thing she had said it was. It was a debt being paid back in the only currency he had ever agreed to accept, which was the truth. Yes, he said. Move her. Naya came off the intensive protocol 36 hours later. She woke up with her hair flattened on one side and her voice rough, and asked before anything else where her sketchpad was. Andre laughed once, a short, surprised sound, and went to find it. She drew that afternoon a picture of a hospital window with snow falling outside it, and a small girl in the bed and a man in a canvas jacket asleep in the chair beside her. At the bottom of the page, she wrote in her careful block letters, "We got to keep him." He folded the picture once and put it inside the breast pocket of his jacket against his shirt, and he did not take it out for a long time. It is tempting to call what Vivian did a grand gesture, the kind of repair only the very rich can make. But the 80 million was the easy part. The hard part was the lectern, the choosing in front of every camera in the city to say the page is mine. Most of us will never have a fortune to give away, and that is not the lesson worth taking from this. The lesson is smaller and within reach of anyone that an apology only counts when it costs the person making it something, and that the truest amends are the ones that hand back what was taken without asking for gratitude in return. She did not buy his forgiveness. She returned his name and then stepped out of the way. Real repair always looks like that, less like a spotlight, more like clearing a path and stepping back so someone else can walk it. 6 months later, the days were warm. Andre opened a small shop on a corner in Ferndale, just past the western edge of the city, in a brick storefront that had been a barbershop for 40 years and then nothing for 10. He kept the original tin ceiling. He painted the front door dark green. He hung a small wooden sign over the entrance that read in plain block letters, "Coleman and Daughter Repair." The "and daughter" had been Nia's idea. He had told her she didn't have to be on the sign if she didn't want to. She had told him with the particular gravity of an 8-year-old that she absolutely did want to. The shop did not make him rich. It made him enough. He had a small workbench by the front window and a row of folding chairs along the wall and a kettle in the back room that was almost always on. Old men from the neighborhood came in to have lamps rewired and clocks looked at. A woman who lived 3 doors down brought him a sewing machine she had inherited from her mother. Nia sat at a small desk by the back window with a sketchpad open in front of her and listened to her father talk to people who more and more were starting to talk back. Vivian did not appear in the news anymore. The press cycle that had followed her resignation had been brutal, and then in the way of such things had been replaced by another cycle, and then by the one after that. The Renee Coleman Foundation grew quietly under the direction of a small board that did not include her name. The Crane Holdings stock recovered, then surpassed its previous high under a new chief executive who had been her deputy for 6 years. Daniel Pierce had been removed from the building inside of 72 hours of the press conference on the recommendation of an internal investigation he had not known was running. His current whereabouts were not Vivian's concern. She lived now in a smaller apartment on the north side of the city in a building without a doorman, and she did her own grocery shopping. She had taken a long time to learn how. She found to her own surprise that she did not miss any of what she had given up. In late May, she went to Palmer Park to walk. She had not gone there to find him. She had gone there because the trees were in leaf and the light through them was the color of fresh paper, and because she had spent the morning at the foundation office and wanted air, she saw Nia first. The girl was 8 now and had grown 2 inches over the winter. She was sitting on the grass beneath an oak tree with a sketch pad open across her knees, drawing in long, careful strokes, and she looked up at the same moment Vivian came around the path, as though she had heard her coming. Miss Sarah. Naya was on her feet and across the grass before her father, sitting on a bench 10 yards away, with a paper cup of coffee in his hand, had time to look up. She hit Vivian at full speed around the waist and held on. "You look different," Naya said into Vivian's coat. "Your hair is longer. You grew." "I know. I had to get new shoes twice." Andre walked over slowly. The paper cup was still in his hand. He did not extend it for a handshake. He did not put it down. He stopped about 3 feet away. "Hello, Mrs. Crane." "Vivian, please." "Vivian." Naya released her, looked up at her father, and with the diplomatic instinct of a child who knew when adults needed to talk, said, "I'm going to go draw the duck pond." She picked up her sketch pad and walked in a deliberate way that fooled no one to a bench 30 feet away that gave her an excellent view of both of them. The 2 adults stood under the oak tree. For a while, neither of them spoke. A breeze moved through the leaves above them. A dog barked somewhere along the water. "Why did you follow me home that night?" he said. She had thought many times over the past 6 months about what she would say if he ever asked. "Because for the first time in my life," she said, "I had just watched a man with every reason in the world to keep that back, and he chose to do the right thing anyway, and I needed to know if a person like that was real. I didn't believe one could be." He looked at her for a long time, and now she glanced over toward the bench where Naya sat with her sketch pad balanced on her knees, head bent, the pencil moving in small, careful arcs. "Now I believe," Vivian said, "and I'm learning how to be one." He did not answer right away. He looked down at the paper cup in his hand. He looked at the small green sign above the trees in the direction of his shop, although the shop was not visible from where they were standing. He looked back at her. "Nia's been asking when you were going to come by," he said. "Has she?" "For a few months now. And what do you tell her?" He looked at her. And for the first time since she had met him, there was something in his face she had not seen before. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing a smile becomes when a man has not let himself have one in a long time. "I tell her soon," he said. "I tell her soon." Across the grass, Nia tore a page off her sketch pad, examined it, and added something in the lower corner in her careful block letters. The drawing showed 3 people standing under a tree. She did not write family across the bottom of it. She wrote the good ones. And perhaps that is the gentlest thing this whole story leaves us with. We spend so much energy trying to decide whether people are good or bad as though it were a fixed thing stamped on us at birth. But Vivian was not born good and did not become good in a single morning at a lectern. She is, by her own honest word, still learning how. Andre did not stay unbroken through 5 hard years because he was made of better stuff than the rest of us. He simply chose one cold night at a time who he wanted to be. Goodness is not a category you fall into. It is a thing you practice badly at first and then a little less badly until one day a child looks at you across a sunlit park and quietly counts you among the good ones. The only question worth carrying out of a story like this is the one each of us gets to answer tomorrow morning when no one is watching, and the right thing costs something. Which kind of person are we practicing to be?